Pleasure to introduce Kate Heddleston and Nicole Zuckerman, who are going to talk to you about technical onboarding, training, and mentoring. Please, a big, big round of applause.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our talk. So how has PyCon been for everyone? Good, yeah?
It's like a roller coaster.
So we're going to talk to you today about technical onboarding, training, and mentoring. My name's Kate Heddleston. I'm a software engineer. I live in San Francisco, California.
I'm Nicole Zuckerman. I'm the picture that's not her. I'm a software engineer at Eventbrite. I'm also a graduate from Hackbright Academy, and I was the first junior engineer of that ilk to join Eventbrite. And I've been helping increasingly with onboarding each successive new junior engineer to join.
Yeah, so the reason that Nicole and I submitted this talk in the first place is we both had very separate experiences at different companies where we joined the company, we worked there for a while, we reached a certain proficiency at programming, and we looked back on our time and we were like, we could have gotten here much faster if there had been any sort of onboarding at all. And so we turned around and created programs at our respective companies to help new engineers get up to speed. And so we came together and submitted this talk. So what is onboarding? For the purposes of this talk, onboarding is the process of taking someone from outside of a team and bringing them in and making them a happy, productive, and independent member of the team. So today we're specifically going to be talking about onboarding junior engineers, but a lot of the things that we do mention today are useful for people of all different skill levels. All right, why do you care? I'm going to give you 4 major reasons why you should care about onboarding. I assume that everyone here probably does already care since you came to this talk, but I want to convince you that onboarding is important, not just in general, but it's important now. So the 4 things that I'm going to talk about are the productivity of the individual, the productivity of the company, the productivity of the team, and bonus, diversity. All right, the productivity of the individual. So this is a category that most people think about, building the skills of the new engineer, getting them up to speed on your tools. There's another category in this, which is their confidence and happiness. A lot of people think that confidence follows skills, when in fact, skills often follow confidence. Confident people are outgoing, they're excited to learn new things, they reach outside their bounds. So onboarding is really great for increasing both the confidence and skill set of new engineers. The productivity of the company. Companies care about money, as they should, and so onboarding is great for the bottom line. More productive engineers make you more money, and that's great. And everyone's happy because the company is making more money. The productivity of the team. This is really important because as you add new engineers to a team, the team fundamentally changes with each new person. There's a lot of sayings about how you don't really know something unless you teach it. And this is absolutely true for company culture and process. If you can't explain your company culture to a new engineer, and you can't explain your process for shipping code, then you don't know it yourself. And so every time you add a new engineer, you should reiterate this both to the new person and also to the existing team, so that you have something a little bit more like this. And as your team grows, this becomes increasingly important. For example, at LinkedIn, at a certain point, every new engineer they added was decreasing their productivity. So the new SVP of engineering had to come in and revamp everything so that adding new engineers didn't decrease the overall productivity of the team. So this is one of my favorite equations that I have ever made up. I used to coach high school JV water polo when I was in college. And it's like 14 and 15-year-old girls, they're beginners at water polo, and I'd have these really philosophical team meetings, where I'd come in with like posters, and so I come in with this one day, and I was trying to explain to them the importance of teamwork, and I told them, your guys' ability to win as a team is the sum of your skills and talents multiplied by your ability to work together as a team. And this means that you all can be less skilled or more mediocre water polo players who work together incredibly well. And you can beat teams of people who are theoretically more skilled or more talented, but don't work together as well. And you can see this in engineering teams. This is absolutely true no matter what the type of team is. There's a lot of really big products out there, like Gmail is one of them, that were built by teams of less than 10 people. Some are even built by teams of less than 5 people. So a small team can be highly productive, especially if they work together really well. All right, our bonus category, diversity. How many of you have read the Dr. Seuss book about the Sneetches? Anyone? Okay, that's pretty good. So it's a children's poem about kind of this society where some Sneetches have stars on their bellies and other Sneetches don't. And it's about the division that happens within the Sneetches because of the stars on some bellies and the non-stars on others. So I use Sneetches to represent diversity. Diversity can mean many different things. So this happens a lot in tech. What you have is a homogeneous group, and they bring into the fold other people who are like themselves, and they have no onboarding. And this works because the new person is a lot like the people who are already on the team. They probably communicate in similar ways. They probably have similar hobbies and interests. So getting up to speed on all of the social practices within the company is easier for this person. They need less onboarding, and it gives them an advantage that they're like the existing group. However, if you would like to hire people who are different than the team you already have, you don't want something like this to happen. You don't want people to feel like they are outside the group. And so having explicit onboarding can help with this enormously. Having a way to bring people up to speed both on social practices and team culture in a way that doesn't rely on the existing social structure is good for diversity. And if you are not sold on hiring people who are different from the team you already have, feel free to come talk to me afterwards. All right, who should onboard? This is either a picture of a bunch of ants carrying some food or a bunch of people carrying a boat. It's open to interpretation, but the idea is you should spread out the load. You don't want to burn out onboarding mentors. Actually, a lot of people on the team can mentor and onboard people in different areas. It doesn't always have to be someone who is incredibly senior.
Yeah, at Eventbrite, I was paired up with someone who was really skilled and talented when I was trying to set up my dev environment initially. And for all his skills and talents, he hadn't recently set his environment up. So he didn't know, the recent foibles and little bugs that were in the system that, say, the most recent person to set up their system did. So in the end, I found someone who had done it more recently, and he was a great help to me in setting up my environment. So this is another great way to get more people involved just right away in someone's integration into a team.
All right, how should you think about onboarding at a conceptual level? You want to maximize your return on investment. I think this makes sense to everyone. No one wants to put in more than they get out of something. This is a really common inefficient way to onboard that I see a lot, where new onboarding mentors are like, I'm going to be the best onboarding mentor ever, and we're going to do everything together, and we're going to take all of these coding classes, and by the end of 3 months, this person is going to know everything that I know. And that's wildly unrealistic and also leads to a lot of burnout. And then companies are like, we can't support any more junior engineers, it's just too much work for everyone. So instead of doing something like this, I think bumper bowling is a better analogy, which is, it's also the only way that I should ever bowl. Set up a world where the junior engineer can play freely and make mistakes, and you don't have to handhold them through the process of getting up to speed on things or learning new technologies. You can really kind of leave them, check in periodically, and make sure that they're roughly on the right track, but they have the freedom to explore and grow without burning out onboarding mentors.
At Eventbrite, I feel much more comfortable writing code and breaking things with impunity when I know it's a well-tested area of the code base, so that I know that I'm not going to push anything that's going to break anything in production and give me a panic attack.
Yeah, so from a technical perspective, having a lot of automation around your development environments and deploy is really useful for hiring junior engineers. You can create places where they can go and play and not have to worry about it. It's also important to note that one of the tenets of expertise is the ability to set boundaries and scope. In order to scope, you have to understand the domain space incredibly well. And so junior engineers, by definition, are not good at scoping and are not good at setting boundaries, because how could they be? And so one of the things to think about is setting these boundaries for junior engineers, making sure that they have this world where they understand where they are and what they're doing. So there are 3 major categories to think about when you think about how to onboard a junior engineer. The first is technical knowledge. Normally, people focus most of their attention on technical knowledge, like 90% of it. I think it's only roughly a third of what you need to get someone up to speed on. Another third is the company knowledge and process. How do you ship code? How do you decide what features get built? Who is in charge of things? And then the third category is personal development. So, like I said, that confidence and that upward trajectory where someone feels like they are independent and progressing is hugely important.
Not to mention the fact that if someone feels like they're going somewhere in a company, they're more likely to stick around. So now you've hired a new junior engineer. How do you get this started? Really, onboarding should probably start from the moment they accept your offer, but for our purposes, we're going to define onboarding as the process of getting someone up to speed until they can be reliably independent. They can ask questions, but you can send them off with a project and know that they'll be able to get it done without just floundering around. So there's really a critical first week, and probably it'll take at least 3 months for any engineer to get up to speed. We're positing that probably 6 months or a year is a better estimate for junior people. So we call this week 1. It's really arbitrary chunk of time, number 1. This is the things that you should get started as soon as possible. Like a dev environment, as I mentioned, buddy them up with the most recent person who set up their system. This is an opportunity to get multiple people invested in their trajectory. Introduce mentors and make those mentors people who can be non-judgmental as well as a technical resource. You'll also want to show them where you keep technical resources. Let's say a book that you consider at your company to be the definitive way that you do Django at your company. Point them to where they can find that resource so they don't have to flounder around and find it themselves, or not. One thing that's really handy is if they journal or blog and keep 3 things per day or per week that they've learned, or 3 things that they didn't understand. They can do this for themselves, but it's also useful for them to be able to touch base with their manager or mentor regularly and discuss these things. One thing that I do at Eventbrite, and I still have it right now, is a document called Things I've Learned. And this is literally a Google Doc that's 50 pages long at this point, and contains things like commands that I seldom need to run, but don't want to have to look up every time in our documentation. Like, for example, how do I update our, we run scans. We make sure that our CSS and everything is up to date. Do I need to be inside my environment or outside? So this is a place for me to keep information like that, and also just things that I've learned that I want to make sure I retain, but I know I won't remember all the information the first time I hear it. It'd be great if you can get them to ship code in their first week, but make sure that this is a very small piece that's not very technically complex. This is really just an opportunity for them to learn your process around shipping code and not so much about the technical challenges of being an engineer. I think this is Kate's favorite slide. Have a social event if you can, so that they feel like they're part of the team. The more they feel like they're socially integrated with them, the more likely they are to ask questions, and you definitely want your junior engineer to be able to ask questions. So this brings us to arbitrary chunk of time number 2. We suggest that you introduce them to the history of the company and any coding philosophies at this point, rather than, let's say, day 1 when their brains are already overloaded and they can't possibly remember it. This is still useful information for them to have, though, so give it to them in arbitrary chunk of time period 2. One thing that I really wish I'd had when I started at Eventbrite was a team map. Someone either holding a piece of paper or a document available online to say, this is Alice, she's great with automation. This is Bob. He's great at things that begin with B, so you should ask him questions about that. And make sure that this is a permanent resource that they can find. I know that people move around desks and everything, but even if they just have Alice, automation, Bob, B-related things, that's really handy, especially when it comes time to ask questions. Probably my favorite part of my onboarding experience at Eventbrite was the introduction of code labs. This is an opportunity maybe 2 or 3 times a week for an hour for a junior engineer, or however many junior engineers you have, to sit in a room with a senior person and ask in a totally safe space whatever questions they can think of, no matter how stupid. And it really does need to be a safe place to ask those questions, otherwise they're likely to just button up and not bother. When you do this, though, make sure that the senior engineer is the kind who can do so without judgment and is good at explaining things. That's a really important facet of this. Questions that your engineer is likely to ask in this can be things like, what is Rabbit? How does the Django ORM work? what is celery? Or even something like, I have this bug in my code and I can't figure out what's going on. Can you walk through it with me? It's important to ascertain where their knowledge begins and ends. So in this, feel free to ask them follow-up questions to make sure that you're starting at a place that's useful for them. And this is another opportunity to get more people invested in a junior engineer's development, because it doesn't have to be the same engineer who's in the room with them every time. You can have someone front end on Mondays for questions about JavaScript. You can have someone on Wednesdays who's full stack, who can follow the Django request cycle throughout. And maybe Friday is a guest star every week or something like that. So this is an opportunity to spread the love and get your team invested. Another thing that's a great tool is shadowing, either an hour a day or maybe a couple of hours a week, for a junior engineer to sit with a senior engineer and listen to their thought process. So the senior engineer will say, okay, so now I'm importing this thing because we're going to need it here, and then I was thinking about structuring it this way. And this is an opportunity for the junior engineer to sort of get a sense for thought processes and the way that you develop code and your code style, rather than getting sort of bogged down in the details about where that semicolon goes. So this brings us to arbitrary chunk of time number 3. We suggest that you introduce one-on-ones at least by now, if you haven't already. This is a once a week, probably 30-minute chunk of time where you can set aside to talk manager to engineer about roadblocks or check in about anything that the engineer has on their mind. And one thing that we've introduced for later engineers who have started after me is the idea of 5-minute presentations. So a senior person or a manager approaches the junior engineer and says, here, you should check out Bloom filters. Why don't you go research that and come back to me in a week and tell me what you've learned? As you guys have probably figured out by now, it doesn't really hurt to have experience in doing presenting early and often. It's a really good skill to develop, and probably one we should all start sooner. And if the manager supplies the topic of conversation, like decorators or generators, that they know that is going to be really useful for the junior engineer, this helps them also hone their research skills, which, as we all know, is also really important. And as Kate mentioned, we learn through teaching, so this will help them keep things in their brains. So goal setting is also really important. This is a junior engineer and their manager probably sitting down and talking about where each of them expects the junior engineer to be in a month or 3 months or 6 months. So if I say that I'm really interested in pursuing data, and my manager was expecting that I would turn into a front-end engineer, there's probably a mismatch there, and we need to figure out how to make both of us happy. And this is a great opportunity for someone who's more senior to help set up some intermediate steps to get them there. For example, a short-term goal can be you should be able to find and fix a bug based on a Sentry error, or comment meaningfully on someone else's code. And then once the junior engineer has achieved this, they'll have a sense of accomplishment. They'll feel like they're really getting someplace. They'll be confident when they do further endeavors. So it's also really important to give engineers feedback on those goals and on projects that they receive. I think a pitfall of engineering is that often we say, well, you could have done this better, or here's a way that you can improve, which is really useful information. But equally useful is, you did this really well. Keep that up. That's an equally good guidepost for learning, and will help them continue to feel like they are not a total failure in engineering and reinforce their imposter syndrome, which probably a lot of them have. So arbitrary chunk of time, period 4. One thing that I do periodically is review concepts that I learned previously. In CodeLab, for example, I'll say, okay, so here's what I remember about a response. And I'll go through a couple of minutes of saying everything that I remember from the last time we talked about it. And then my buddy, my mentor, my senior engineer can say, yeah, that's really good. This chunk that you missed is also really important, so make sure that you keep track of that. So this is not only for the junior engineer's personal development, it also gives them the input about the chunks that didn't exactly sink in the first time. And if you're anything like me, there are many of these pieces where you'll get a large chunk of the information the first time, and then some of the details will dribble out the side. Make sure you check in regularly with your engineer. It's really important to just give them an opportunity to talk to you openly. And it probably seems pretty obvious that they can do that, but you'd be surprised how much of a difference it makes if you say, are you having trouble with anything? Is there anything I can help you with? It kind of opens up the floodgates and just gives them a really good opportunity to take advantage of your offer. And maybe this is an opportunity now to spend less time shadowing and have them start co-piloting on a larger project with a more senior person. So this is where they can take turns driving. And if you went through driver's ed like I do, then the person who's more experienced in the passenger seat has a secret emergency brake that they can use if anything goes seriously awry. So they get to take a bigger role in a project, but also have the safety of knowing that there's someone who can help them when they get stuck. So once you've gone through this, continue to check in on goals and tailor projects and code labs to how they're doing. It's a really individual and organic process. So one size fits all isn't really gonna work here. Stick with the things that work and remove the things that don't. So one thing that's really useful at this point, though, is a sort of informal apprenticeship, where a senior engineer takes more responsibility for a junior engineer and passes on their domain knowledge. The junior engineer gets bigger chunks of code that they are responsible for, and they're really sort of under someone's wing. And this has the added bonus of training the senior person, if they're interested in it, to play a bigger role maybe in running a team or in heading towards management. One thing that we haven't really discussed, though, is how you really assess how someone's doing, or how you fix it if they're not doing as well as you'd like. If they're on this middle trajectory and you think they have the potential to do much better, how do you do that? Really, the answer is communication. And let's say you talk to them and you find that they're not really as confident in their coding as you want them to be. Often an answer will lend itself to the question at hand. So if it's confidence, for example, then maybe you set them some small, quick wins that they can do to make them feel like they're really getting it. Or if they're picking up some bad code habits, take a look at who their mentors are. They may be picking up some things that are okay for a senior engineer who really knows what they're doing, but habits you don't really want to instill in your junior engineer when they're straight out the gate. But do remember that not everyone comes out the same. This isn't a finish line that everyone hits, but you have the power to set them up on a better trajectory, and I'm sure you all take that seriously since you're here, but it's a good thing to remember.
I would like to mention that the last slide was technically incorrect. I, for some reason, drew asymptotic lines as though like people can like never achieve anything above or below where they're at, and that's not true. So you should just know that that slide is incorrect. But when you're thinking about the assessment categories for people, if someone isn't performing up to the standards that you think they should be performing to, these are the 5 categories we came up with to take a look at. So confidence, code quality, communication, judgment, and technical knowledge. We've all worked with people who are insufficient in one of these categories, and so it's important to realize that it's not just technical knowledge that people need help on. So a lot of times judgment is super important. Are they building the right things? Because if someone is building the right thing, it doesn't matter if they take more or less time to do it, they're going to get to the right place at the end of the day.
So this is our coda. This is my contribution to the slides. In case you were curious, the rest of them are Kate's responsibility. Onboarding is a problem like any other that we face in engineering, and it's really best solved through iteration and feedback and revision. And if you take one thing away from this presentation, let it be keep the communication channels open. This is the best way to ensure that you're both on the same page and you're really getting somewhere. But if you have space in your brain for 3 things, let it be these. Success is not just being the most technically skilled. There's a lot of areas where it's really important for people to develop. It really benefits everyone in the long run, and everyone can be involved. It takes a village to raise a child. I'd like to think that it takes an engineering team to bring a junior developer on board successfully.
Okay, so hopefully you guys are convinced to start improving your process now. One of the things we talk about a lot as engineers is code debt. We all know what this is, and we're terrified of it, and I'm sure all of your companies have lots of it that you are sad about. But people don't talk a lot about team debt or management debt, which is essentially you accrue debt with the employees that you have on your team if you don't take care of them and you don't pay attention to them. And so onboarding is the first step in making sure that you minimize this team debt so that a year from now you don't have people leaving because they got off on the wrong foot or didn't have any help at the beginning. So we have a repo at this link where we have some resources to give new people on Python and Django. We have some of the rubrics for assessing others. So if you want any resources, you can go there. And if you have questions, please ask them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for one question, and I'm going to walk over to this mic stand where people will see you. So one question, please.
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about adapting these techniques and ideas towards a distributed team.
That is a fantastic question. One of the things I say about scaling a team is that the thing you're scaling is actually communication. Communication it's the bottleneck, right? You have a small team and everyone can talk to everyone, and as you grow, that's not possible. And with a distributed team, I think communication is really that's the crux of what's going on. You need people to be able to communicate about your processes, about what's going on, and all that different stuff. So a lot of the things we talk about will still work. I mean, you could have a virtual social event. You can still have people help set up dev environments, but I think the biggest thing is really focusing on the communication channels, because you're not going to be able to get information to remote developers without that.
We do have a resource on our repo that helps code from afar when you're pairing, helps pair from afar when you're coding. There we go. So if you check that out, that might help.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.